It's a great pleasure to start a third day of BCBT with José HALLOY. So José is trained as a physicist, also very much with people like Dorigo, right? You were with Dorigo and
No, I was with Jean-Louis, the Nouveau.
Okay. Ah, yeah, right. Exactly.
He's also.
So these physicists who had a great interest in understanding the complex dynamical systems underlying life, behavior, and so on. José has really pursued that line of research now for quite a period of time. He applies these more sort of formal models from physics to complex phenomena in biology and life. But in addition to that, maybe also because he's associated with an institute that investigates energy and basic physics, he has also a great interest in actually how we can construct these kinds of artificial life systems. Thank you. So that means José is not only investigating life, and he tries to also, in that sense, test and advance the methods we can use to understand living systems, but he has also a great interest in how we actually can synthesize living systems, and he has a lot of very critical and deep insights on the limitations we face in actually doing that. So in that sense, José is really a research profile that is deeply multidisciplinary, but intrinsically within the questions that he is pursuing and not imposed from the outside for any reasons of fashion. So it's wonderful that he's here, and I'm looking forward to your talk, which is going to be about social biohybrid systems of animals and robots. So I'm looking forward to your talk, José. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about a strange topic that very few people do in the world. There are a few labs doing that. Why there are few labs doing that? Maybe because it's completely silly to do that, but it's also because it's mixing two difficult kind of studies. The first kind of study is to study animal behavior, and we are interested in collective animal behavior. And that is a tedious task to do animal experiments and repeat those experiments until you get something out to understand how a collection of animals make decisions and how they behave collectively, and how the group is maintains its coherence, decides to do things at the same time or not, and stuff like that. And the other side of the coin is building robots and building new technological tools for their own sake, because of course people are interested in developing robots, as you may have noticed, as a tool, as a technological tool. We do that in collaboration with the EPFL in Lausanne. Those robotics labs are very good at designing robots. And it's also expensive, tedious, it takes time, robots don't work, you have to program them, it's difficult, and it takes years to have a prototype. And so we are mixing these two together, which means we have the difficulties of doing animal collective behavior and the difficulties of building a robot, and the robot has to interact with the animal, and that's a kind of field of application for robotics. Because most of the time you hear about human-robot interactions, but what about animal-robot interaction? Because as you know, since the Enlightenment, the question about the machine, the human, and the animal are all linked together, in fact. Each time you think about what is an animal, you're talking about what is a human. Each time you're thinking about what is a machine, it's either inspired by animals or inspired by humans. So it is a triangle of scientific and philosophical discussion. So the idea is then to mix those guys together. This is a picture taken a few years ago when we were doing experiments with chicken and robots. And what are we trying to do? So I will start by reminding you about Alan Turing, the mathematician. He's very famous for several reasons. He's one of the founders of the computation theory, the so-called Turing-complete machines, so universal machines that are now computers that can do anything. He was one of the founders of that idea in math with the American mathematician Church also. He's also well known. It's probably his most cited paper about morphogenesis. He discovered the idea that diffusion is not something flattening out structure, but it can produce structures. And it has had a huge impact in biology, in developmental biology, for mathematical models of morphogenesis. But I'm not going to talk about that now, although I am talking about that now. I'm going to focus on the Turing test, because he was also interested in artificial intelligence, and was also interested in deciphering cryptography during the war and all that stuff. And he has an interesting biography. If you don't know, read about it. It's interesting. And at the same time, it's quite moving, because he died in a strange situation. That
in that sense, we should not be fooled by this movie, The Imitation Game, right? Because this is really rather sort of a deep interpretation and a romanticization of the real story. So
exactly.
You should read the biography.
Yeah, exactly. So he proposed the Turing test. Who has read who knows about the Turing test here in this? Who has read the paper, the original paper? What is the Turing test about? In fact, it's interesting to read the paper and first lesson. Always read the original paper. Don't trust people who talk about ideas of others without reading their ideas yourself. So basically, that's a Wikipedia picture. You have some human here. They are a machine or another human on the other side. They don't see each other, and they communicate by typing to avoid the problem of voice and so on, and seeing the other stuff. And the question that this guy asked to answer is, am I chatting with a computer or with a human? And the idea of Alan Turing, which is controversial, as you know, is if I cannot make the difference between the two, then the computer has somehow become intelligent. What kind of intelligence it is, it's controversial, it's not very clear, but every year there is a competition about a chatbot for a Turing test. But what is interesting, and it's related to its biography, so that's the paper that you should have read by now. He wants to make the difference between a man and a woman. So that's the real test that he was proposing. So you have an interrogator, and he's chatting on the other side by teletype with either a man, a woman, or a machine, and he has to make the difference. And when you know the biography of Alan Turing, it's quite moving to see that he was thinking about making the difference between a man and a woman in the test. But anyway, there is also, I'm not saying spending a lot of time there. If there is one book that you should read, which is interesting, is that one. It's about the Loebner Prize. The Loebner Prize is people who are really performing the Turing test every year, and there is a prize for the best chatbot. But what is interesting is when you do that test, you're also testing human. And we are coming back to the previous talk, what does it mean to be human? Because, of course, you have to say, okay, if you're chatting with a computer, you have to say, oh, that is the computer, or oh, that is a person. And then, yeah, great, the computer has passed the test. But if you're chatting with a guy or over there, you have to say if that person is a computer or not. And of course, people are saying, oh, that is a computer. So the Loebner Prize also look for the best human. So the human that is passing the test and has received the more notes by the interrogator saying, oh, that's a human. Because, of course, if they fail, they can also fail on the other side. So it's interesting that humans are also passing the Turing test, and some humans are perceived more humans than others. So that's why it's interesting to read that book. It's funny on the beach. So we have to think about generalizing the test because it's an interesting question. So for now, what the problem we have is that we are not passing the test to prove that the computer is a human. We are passing a test to prove that we are a human to a computer. If you go to the web, we spend our time answering questions to prove that you're not a computer, you're a human, and it's a computer asking you the question. So it's a simple task that you have to perform, a CAPTCHA or something like that, or on the physical journals, the scientific journals, you have to recognize Einstein among the pictures. That's the physicist joke. To download the paper, to avoid that it's a robot that is downloading the paper. So you have each time I download a physics paper, I have to find, to prove that I'm a human, and to do that I have to recognize the picture of Albert Einstein. But you see that it's a tricky question, and it has some interest, and from a point of view of thinking about what we are doing and what we are and stuff like that. So why I find that test interesting beyond the fact that is the computer intelligent, is capable of being a good chatbot or not, I don't care. But I think it's interesting because it's a kind of social election. You're deciding that the stuff you're interacting with it is interesting enough. Of course, if you have a stupid computer or a stupid robot or anything, or even a stupid human, you don't want to spend your time interacting. You don't find that thing that you're interacting with interesting enough. But it doesn't mean that this intelligence has to be at your own level. Well, you're interacting with your dog, right? I guess you have not the same level of intelligence or the same kind of intelligence as a dog, but you find it interesting to interact with a dog for many reasons. So you accept those animals, domestic animals, are social companions for many reasons. So the question we have to address is, can we accept those robots are social companions? When are they good enough to be that? And I want to ask that question with animals. The thing is that animals, they don't speak, they don't type, they don't use symbolic communication. You may argue that the bee, the waggle dance of the bee might be symbolic, but it's not really so much. But anyway, so you have to build a machine that is capable of interacting with the animals. And I will argue that it's a new interesting tool, and there are only about 5 people who think that for the moment. So at the same time, in ethology, so in people who are studying animal behavior, then they suddenly realize that technology has done some progress. You know, biologists take some time. Are there any biologists in the room? So I can criticize them all the time. So suddenly they realize that the engineers haven't been sleeping while they were working, and they've done devices. And for instance, you can get a lot of data out of animal experiment, and with that data you analyze it and you get a model or an ethogram of what the animals are doing. And if you have a lot of data, then you can talk about buzzwords like genomics. You use atomics, which means you have so much data about that you can reconstruct a lot of information. And then they realize also that you can automate image, and the image are digital, and you can analyze the image with computing techniques. And so you get the data out of your experiment. It's mostly for, it's illustrated with Drosophila there, but there are other kinds of animals you can do. And from that data, recorded with a digital camera, you can analyze it, and at the end of the day, you have some kind of model about what it is about. So you see, it's fairly recently that biologists discovered that you can buy a digital camera and do stuff with it. And of course, you have also, that's in neurons, so because I'm stepping back away from all the other talks, I leave the neurons where they are. I don't even know if they exist in my experiment. Well, I know they exist, but I have no proof of it because I never looked for them. But you see people also in neuroscience, they say, well, that's great, because if we improve in terms of computation the ethology field, we will make a link between the lower level, I mean, what's happening in the brain or in the neurons of those animals, and what they are really doing. And you know, if you're in neuroscience, that there's a huge gap between what the neuroscience are doing at the brain level or at the neuron level compared to what ethology is doing at the behavior level. There is a gap there that is quite difficult from a scientific point of view. And I'm interested, as I said, in collective behavior. Collective behavior is very interesting because nobody has in a group of animals the whole information of what's going on. They don't work like that. They don't work like that because they are constrained by what they can perceive. So you're a GNU in a group of thousands of GNU, right? In Africa, somewhere there, wildebeest. And there are thousands, 100,000 of your buddies around. Who knows how many there are? Nobody. I mean, in the GNU. Who knows what the group is doing? Nobody. So you're just seeing what your neighbors are doing. And that's because you're constrained by what you can perceive by hearing, seeing, or smelling around you. And it has a certain range of perception. And of course, everybody's acting in those groups on incomplete information. And nevertheless, they're capable of doing things. So that is interesting. You have animals as a group with incomplete information that do intelligent things, clever things. They can make a decision together and stuff like that. So that is interesting to study, and it has given also birth of the field of swarm robotics. So if you have to build a collection of robots that has to work as a group, how do you program them to do that? And you're happy to learn that simple animals can do that, insects can do that, and stuff like that. So you say, oh, if I understand how those simple between quotes, of course, are doing that, then I can hope to build some collective robotics out of that. So let's go back to the origin, the modern origin of ethology with the two Nobel Prizes, Tinbergen and Konrad Lorenz. So that got the Nobel Prize for inventing the field, practically. So what they show is that if you take the stickleback there, it's a fish, it has a red belly. You don't see it because it's a book, at that time the books were black and white. That's also interesting. And if you take a piece of whatever, wood, and you paint one side gray and the other side red, this is red, right? And you show that to the fish reacts. So which means that an artifact, completely artificial, can trigger a response from the animal, and it doesn't look at all like a fish, but it has to have some kind of form that triggers the signal, and the form is here having a red belly and some kind of shape, bicolor shape, and then the stickleback says, oh, there is an intruder, I'm going to fight that intruder in my aquarium. But it's even more interesting. What they showed is that now you have this behavior of seagulls and other birds where the chicks are begging for food, right? And the parents come back to the nest and they give food, they regurgitate the food in the mouth of the chicks. And so the little chicks are begging for the food, and they are begging to the head of the parent that is flying back, either the female or the male, it depends on the species. And so you take, again, a piece of wood and you do it as the shape of a seagull, right? And you paint the beak in yellow-orange, and then, of course, the little chick is begging that head in wood, oh, give me food, give me food. And you have a response. So it, again, an artifact, very simple, triggers the animal response. But what they show is that you put a stick there with some colored mark, and the chicks respond more. So their response is higher for a highly abstract stimulus than for some kind of realistic copy of the animal. So this idea is a good news if you want to interact with animals, because you see that artifacts that are rather abstract and that don't look like animals can trigger responses. And the next step is to do more clever artifacts. All those are artifacts. They are more or less robotics. They are teleoperated. You see they are on rails here. That one is in plastic. It can inflate its throat. It can also send noise. That one, okay, you get the idea. So that's the modern version, but most of the time they are operated by a human being. The experimenter is somewhere hidden there, and it's, as you see the rails here, you see it behind the curtains, and they send this artifact to the animals, hoping to get a response and to understand what are the stimuli that triggers a behavior and what is important or not. What is important for a frog here, is it inflating its throat or making the sound they do, or both? If you have a frog that only make noise, no throat, is it as efficient as one that is only throat and no noise? That's basically the question. So, because communication in animals is all the time multimodal, you want to entangle the fact what are the relevant stimuli.
So all of these were actuated in some way?
Yeah, they are all actuated in some way, but by a human operator. And so the idea is to remove the human. The idea we are working on is to remove the operator. So we've done a few experiments. This one is the basic idea. So you have the animal, you have a robot there. It's the Vaucanson duck, for those who know that. So it's in the Enlightenment when people started to believe animals are machines. Humans are animals, so they are machines. But there is a difference between the animal machine and the human. It's called consciousness, Paul. That's the difference. Some are pretending. And they started to build those kind of automata that they were not called robot at that time. But what I want to do here is to close the loop of interaction. Remove the human out of the loop. The human is still there, hidden in the setup, but it's not part of the setup, hidden outside of the setup. And so the robot is perceiving what the animal is doing, and it's reacting to it, and hopefully the robot passed this so-called Turing test, and the animal is taking care of what the robot is doing. And that's the difficult part. This part is a technological problem that is rather easy to do in the lab, of course, not in the wild, in the lab. And that part is the tricky part. Animals don't care about robots. That's the big news of my talk. So I argue that it's much more difficult to make a robot interact with an animal than with a human being, because human beings are silly social animals. You give them a Tamagotchi and they play with that for hours, days, weeks. You show some kind of Tamagotchi to a duck, it doesn't give a fuck about it because it's not interesting. So the question is, what makes a robot interesting for an animal, and which means what do animals perceive in the other thing that makes them interesting enough to interact? And this arrow is the most difficult one, and that's why probably very few people are doing that, and very few results are coming out of all that. So how can you do that? You can do that in several ways. You can, the most obvious way, if you build some kind of mobile robot, right? Flying, swimming, walking, whatever, and you mix up, you add this robot to the group of animals, and if the animals accept that robot, then you have a buddy there, part of the group. And because you program the robot to behave a certain way, and because every individual has an impact on the group, you may modulate what the group is doing. But that's the obvious way, but there are other ways. You have the cyborg way, which is you plug something into the animal. People are doing that, if you've seen that for insects, flying insects or cockroaches. They plug the device directly in the neurons of the animal, and so they can somehow manipulate or drive some of the animal. This raises a lot of ethical questions, of course. They do that only on insects because, as you know, insects are not protected by the laws of animal experimentation because only vertebrates are. So I don't do that. There is other ways to do that you're not plugging the device directly on the neural system of the animal, so you're not invading its body. At MIT, Daniela Rust tried to do with colors with cows, right? and adding colors, intelligent colors to cow to try to drive a herd of cows. They never succeeded because cows are difficult people to talk to. And we don't really understand how to talk to a cow. So we discussed that with her because we discussed about the methodology, and I said the methodology is to understand how a cow talks. And they said, no, I'm not going to do that, it's too much work. Because she's an engineer and a roboticist. She's more interested in robots than in animals. I'm interested in both. And another way to do it, which is not obvious, is it's the environment that is the robot. So no, people that are in robotics will raise their hand, I'm sorry, no, that's not the robot, because the robot has to be mobile, blah, 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 blah. I don't care. The environment can be a robot. I define a robot as something, a machine that can perceive what is going on in its environment and it can act on that environment. That's the basic definition I give for a robot. Then you have a robot that is raising his hand, I'm sorry, but then a thermostat is a robot according to you. Yes. Well, that's stupid. No. Because a virus, is it alive or not? It's not an interesting question. A bacteria, is it alive? Yes, but so the thermostat, is it? Yeah, it's a very simplistic robot. It perceives what's going on. It acts on its environment. So you can build an intelligent environment, and the environment is going to react and to what the animals are doing and to send signals to those animals, whatever signals you want to send. So in the project we are working, for the moment I'm working with fish, and I'm doing these two things, trying to do these two things. And people in Austria, in Graz, are working with bees, real bees, though the domestic bees, and they are trying to do that. So having an environment that is influencing the bee. Okay, so we want to build robot and artificial intelligence tools to study animal and to make a link between that. And we think it's interesting both for enhancing what robots can do and also enhancing our understanding of animals. So we do that for those two reasons. And while you do that, you're doing also something that is a special translator, C3PO, remember the movie? That's a universal translator. And then a smart tool, okay? R2D2, it's a smart tool, it doesn't talk much. But it's very useful to drive something or to repair something. And so it's exactly that. When we are building those robots, we are trying to talk to the animals, whatever that means. And we are using those robots as a tool to perform experiments also. So we are doing many things at the same time and in a completely disorder. Because it's very difficult. It's very difficult to work in a nonlinear way in a linear time frame. You never think about that? I'm always annoyed by that. Time is flying linearly and we think non-linearly. So you need to do everything at the same time because not everything in science is a sequence. So, yeah, I was drinking last night. Okay. So the way I'm thinking is, yes, I'm a pervert physicist, so I believe in mathematical models, and because they've been very useful in physics and chemistry, and so we believe that they can be very useful in biology, and they are to a certain extent, of course. So basically, I'm biased toward dynamical system theory and nonlinear feedbacks and networks and all that stuff, right? So now I'm going to talk about two experimental examples we've been working for the last 10 years. It's the cockroach stuff, the chicken, and then I will finish with fish, and then we all do a barbecue. So the cockroach stuff was a very simple question. You take a bunch of cockroaches, the American cockroach. You know, in America, everything is bigger, including the cockroaches. So that's a cockroach that is about 3 to 4 centimeters. And why you want to do a cockroach that is about 3 to 4 centimeters is because the robots cannot be smaller than that. Because what makes the size of a robot? It's the battery, you stupid. Because you need it to be autonomous in the experiment here, for an hour or so. And it's the battery that makes the size of the robot. And the most difficult thing when we build that is to find the batteries that make the robot autonomous for an hour and so on. And that's why it's a bit bigger than the cockroach. It's the battery. It's just PCB boards, which is flat, and inside there is a big battery to make it autonomous. That's why we were working with the American cockroach, although we have done a lot of experiments on the German cockroach, and the German cockroach is smaller. It's about 1 centimeter, 1.5, and they behave the same way. So what was the question? The question is that those animals are nocturnal animals. That's why you don't see them during the day, because they are hidden below your fridge. And during the night, they get out and they look for food. And in fact, these animals are only afraid of one thing, is you squashing them. So each time they feel, they have these little organs there, if they feel air moving, they just run away as fast as they can, because they know it's something stupid that want to squash them. They don't have a lot of predators because they live with us in our cities and our houses. So if you switch on the light, they're going to look for a dark place because they don't like the light. So you took two parasols there, okay, two that are making a shade. You're on the beach, the sun is on, and what they want to do is to gather below the shade, right? And if you take a bunch of them, and if the two shades are exactly of the same quality, what you observe is they are all together below one of the shelters only. How do they do that, those stupid cockroaches? How do they agree to be all of them under one of the shelter? And it's obvious, it's not obvious, because if you spread, let's say, a bunch of cockroaches and they spread randomly, you expect to have 50% on one side, 50% on the other side. But that's not what is happening. Or you may have also, they never settle, they just keep moving. But they do settle and they do gather most of the time below one of them. And so the question is, how do they make the decision as a cockroach to gather below the same shelter? And if we understand that, we can build a mathematical model. That's what we did. That's the answer. So you see the answer is a set of differential equations. And it's the number of cockroach below a shelter, and then you have, wow, my equation is broken. How come? It's the screen, it's a projector. Oh. But it doesn't matter. You have the entrance here, and the entrance is telling you just that you have a certain probability of finding the shelter and then entering, but there is a size, a limiting effect. So when the metro is packed with people, you cannot enter in it. That's what this stuff is saying. But then you have the exit term. So there is a minus here that has escaped to the beach probably. So this function is a nonlinear function, as you see, and also it has an exponent there. And the magic trick that I'm going to explain only works if that exponent is larger than 1. And there are many reasons why from a dynamical system point of view. And basically, when you describe, you see that it's an ordinary differential equation for those who are not sleeping. And but it's a spatial problem. Yeah, but we've divided the space into boxes, and they just transfer of cockroaches between boxes. And so this function is the trick that makes the cockroaches intelligent. So what does it mean? In fact, there is a minus here, so it's the modulation of the exit that makes the decision. And it's a nonlinear function. When the exponent is larger than 1, you have a threshold function. And a threshold function is what makes the trick in biology. You know, even in neurons, you always have a threshold function there to make them fire. And so that's exactly the same idea. If the exponent is less than 1, then you don't have the multi-stability that appears in the system. And from a dynamical system point of view, if you've been training dynamical system, it's trivial there. Because in fact, what I'm looking for a system that can produce multiple state stable What are the stable state? It's being on the right or being on the left altogether. So if I solve that equations, I get what is called a bifurcation diagram, which means that's the ratio about the size and the number of cockroaches. And then there is a bifurcation point, which means you have one solution before that point, and after that point you have three solutions, 1, 2, 3. So this is a multi-solution system beyond the point. Two of the states are stable, here in bold line. This one is unstable, that one is stable. And what does it mean? It means that everybody is on the left or on the right because you have a symmetrical system. So it corresponds to this solution, right? Everybody is on the left or in the right. And you get that, and from again, from a dynamical system point of view, it's very easy, because if you want a system to have a multiple state solution, the only thing you need, it's a necessary condition but not sufficient, is to have a positive feedback with a threshold function, right? And then you may wonder, where is the positive feedback in the cockroach system? And if I go back to the broken equation,
but this doesn't explain the individual behavior, right?
Yes.
It's a model of the global population.
It's a model of the global population based on the individual behavior.
But I don't see where is the individual model here.
X is one animal.
Yeah, but it depends on for example, the carrying capacity of the shelter that is not known by the cockroach.
That's the environment. The interplay with the interplay among the animals they do take care of all the others, what the others are doing, and they do take care of what the environment is about.
But it makes the assumption that the cockroaches are able to estimate how many cockroaches can be below a shelter.
No, it's an indirect estimation. They don't estimate the number. They feel. I can't explain that. It's very.
There's a point, right? But
Yeah.
But it's a testable prediction that you're
Yeah.
making, because you're saying, if you look at the model,
Yeah.
initially you go to a 50-50 distribution.
Yeah.
Or you go to a distribution that means it's equal for all available shelters.
Yeah.
And then there's a switch, a
Yeah.
rapid switch.
Yeah.
So is that confirmed by the actual behavior of these animals? Because that you haven't shown us.
That's the experiment.
Okay. But even the number of individuals, how can they estimate this?
They don't.
So it's not the individual model.
Yes.
What I not understand.
So yeah, it's a bit tricky. So that's the experimental validation that Paul was asking. So if you do the experiments, you have most of the cockroach here, and then there is a bifurcation point, and they are either on the left or on the right, the majority. So how the model does work? The model works, in fact, indeed, it's an interesting discussion, because well, I'm sorry that the equation is broken. I don't know exactly why, but it's the projector. So let's go back to this model. This model the animals have to take into account the environment, and so they really feel the carrying capacity. That's very easy to feel it. It's filling a box. When the box is full, it's not that you have counted how many people are in the metro. You just cannot enter into it because it's full. So you don't need to count. You just feel that you cannot enter it. And it's interesting to take into account, it's not interesting. You have to take into account the environment, because in fact you need, in the system, you need a positive feedback to get the multi-stable system, but you need a negative feedback to stop. Because in fact what the positive feedback is doing is a snowball effect. It's amplifying what the system is doing, but then you have to stop it. Otherwise you get an exponential increase, and then the system is not physical in the sense that it's booming. And what is interesting in those collective animal behavior is that the positive feedback is usually implemented at the level of the animal, and the negative feedback is usually given by a constraint in the environment. So what the cockroaches are doing here, they are walking around, they don't know how many shelters. They don't need to know how many shelters are in the system. They just walk around, and then suddenly they're in a place where it's darker.
they can perceive the place is darker, they have eyes. And then they see there are buddies around them. They don't count how many they are, they just feel them by smell and tactile interaction. So if I arrive in this region, I say, okay, this is dark, and I see one buddy there, one buddy there. So my probability to leave decrease. And that's what this function is saying. The probability to leave a shelter depends on the number of buddies you feel, and with a threshold function, which means when there is enough buddies, and enough for that system is about 4 individuals. If you perceive, and I'm not saying they're counting, if they perceive the equivalent of 4, the probability to go nearly drops to 0.
But wait, the threshold value must depend on your estimate of the total population size. If you're alone in the kitchen,
Yeah.
then you're not going to run under all the
Yeah.
different shelters. You're going to be stuck under the fridge.
No.
They keep on running.
They keep on moving.
Sure?
Yeah, they keep
You're
on
gonna show that
exploring.
to us.
Yeah, yeah.
You're going to show that.
Sorry?
You're going to show that to us.
No, I'm not going to show that. You have to believe me because I did the experiment. In fact, when you put a single cockroach, and we have tested many single ones because there are other interesting. We are going to spend the day on the cockroach.
Plenty of time, don't worry.
But if you put only one, it keeps moving, because the life of a cockroach is to feel good, and they feel good for 2 reasons: because they are in a nice place for them, and because they are with their buddies. Because they live better. It's proved also not by us but by a biologist. If you breed cockroaches alone, or if you breed them in groups, they are better from a physiological and growth point of view when they are in a group. So there is really a social benefit of being. So they are looking for the shelter and the buddies.
Okay, but that means there's a prior in that system.
Yeah.
They always seek out each other.
Yeah.
That's what they're
Exactly. That's why we study them, because they behave collectively, and the social behavior is at the level of the individual.
Right.
It's not like they are attracted, you put a piece of sugar and you attract the ants. That's not a social behavior. The sugar is just attracting all the ants. So now you are right in pointing out, but that's not individuals because it's a differential equation, so it's a mean. It's the mean of the population, right? And it's true. It is described by the mean of a population, but if you implement that into robot, it works. And what we do in the robots is like just what I said. We implement this threshold function, and when the robot perceives how many individuals there are nearby, they just change their probability to leave.
This I can understand how they can estimate the ratio xi over si. It's okay, but xe, the number of individuals outside the shelter, there's no way of estimating this.
No.
Since they are.
They don't. They don't need to do that. They don't need to do that. It's the equation because it's the flux. The flux of cockroaches depend on the one that is outside. That's to enter the shelter, right? So the number of the number of cockroaches that go inside a shelter depend on the number of cockroaches outside, of course. If there is nobody outside, nobody can get in. They're all inside already. Just it's a mathematical description, right? But it's true that this is a mean effect, and then you may wonder, are they estimating the density? No. In fact, it's like, I don't know what training you have, it's like the same discussion about the Brownian motion, right? The Brownian motion, you can have a description of the particle at the particle level, and it's a random walk. So each time step, you decide you go one direction, and it's the toss of a coin probability, right? If it's on a line, you go in front or back probability. Now, if that's the description at the level, and you can have an equation to describe that stochastically. But now, if you take the mean of that, you have the diffusion equation, right? So this is the equivalent of somehow the equivalent of the diffusion equation of particles that have a behavior intrinsically. So I'm not saying that the cockroaches are estimating the density. And you can implement that into algorithm, like you can do the Brownian motion in 2 ways. Either you simulating particles, or you just solving a differential equation, and you have a wave of diffusion in the system. It's exactly that. We have done that. You can implement an agent-based model with particles, so-called cockroach particles, and then it works. Or you can solve the differential equation, it gives the same result. And that's a good question because there is an issue here. How do I go from the individual level to this differential equation?
The model of the individual is different than this global model.
I wouldn't say it's different because the hypotheses are the same, but the description is different.
The result is the same, but
The description is different. But
microscopic, macroscopic.
exactly, it's again, it's the think. I don't know if you're familiar with the Brownian motion, right? But think in terms of Brownian motion. So either you write a diffusion equation, and you can get the mean path, right? And then you have the probability to find the particle at a certain distance from the start, but it doesn't change the behavior of the particle. Or you simulate the Brownian motion by a random walk.
yeah, but both models are very different.
Yeah.
The model of the particle and the model of the global diffusion.
Yeah.
They are not the same.
Yes, but they describe the same system, and what you want to do is to travel from one to the other. That's what Einstein did in 905,
Well,
right?
but they might make somewhat different predictions. So in that sense,
Yeah.
it's also about then testing those predictions
Yeah.
to see if the models are empirically adequate.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you can do a stochastic simulation of the system. That's a stochastic simulation. That's not a stochastic simulation. That's solving the master equation corresponding to the differential equation.
Why do you distinguish now between these two different types of cockroaches?
But to show that they have the same kind of behavior.
So this is behavior.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so experimentally we find the same solution, right? The same bifurcation solution. And by the way, if we go back to this solution, it's interesting because there is a nonlinear effect also here while we're spending time on the cockroach stuff. So here you have that solution. You have 50% of the cockroaches on one side and 50% on the other side. Now imagine you want to be inside with your buddies. You may expect that you fill up one of the box, right? And when it's full, the others cannot enter and they go on the other one. So what you can have is this box is completely full or nearly full, and that one contains not many cockroaches. It's an obvious solution that you may have in the system. That's not what they do. What they do is they really spread nearly 50-50% because it's a consequence of the nonlinear behavior. And you get that for free also.
And that's independent of the initial conditions. That means the
Yeah.
initial distribution in
Yeah.
space.
Yeah, they are randomly distributed in the system because we just opened. Yeah.
Just avoid getting close to the
Ah.
microphone because it's producing some
Larsen effect. Ah. Okay, so it has nonlinear effects. So it means that those animals are capable of choosing to be together in a shelter without knowing how many cockroaches they are, how many shelter they are. And when they distribute in a remarkable way. And then we can change the number of shelter. We've done that. And then they spread either, if there are 4, they spread 25%. If there are 3, they spend third, and so on. Without counting. They don't know how many they are. So now if I ask you to spread 50% on that side, 50% on this side, without discussing, right, without knowing, etc., it will take a certain time to reach that decision. But the cockroaches, they do that automatically because we believe that this nonlinear model is the way they make decisions. And we believe so much that when we, let's go back to the picture, we build this little matchbox robot, and the only purpose of that robot is to behave like the model we just described. So they are walking while they're wheeling, driving randomly in the system. They have photodiodes on the top, so they detect there is a shelter here. And so the light is lower, so we say, it's interesting. Then they have IR detectors on the sides. So they look around, do I see any other robot? Yeah, I cannot be close to that, sorry. So they look around how many robot or how many cockroaches are there around me, and I change my probability to leave. If the shelter is empty, I keep moving. If there are enough cockroaches or robots, I stay there. So if we do the experiments only with the robots, they do behave like the cockroaches. And now the trick is, if we add the robots to the cockroach group, will they behave like it's a group independently made of cockroaches and robots? The answer is yes, provided that you lure the animals into accepting those robots. Remember, those cockroaches are afraid to be squashed. So each time you put a robot there, they just run away of it because it's perceived as a threat. So to make it accepted by the group, you see there is a high-tech solution there, which is a filter paper with a rubber band. And this high-tech solution is in fact a high-tech solution because we have put channel 5 cockroach on the robot. So we have identified, because insects recognize each other by the molecules they have on their body. And so they have these antennas. These are tactile organs, but are also olfactory organs. So by touching you, they smell that if you're a cockroach or not, and if you belong to the group or not. So they can detect that. So our colleagues in biology have spent a lot of time analyzing the kind of molecules, and then you can synthesize the perfume of the cockroach, and you drop a drop of that perfume on the robot, and automatically you see that the cockroaches are fine with those. They say they smell it. If you smell like a cockroach, you're a cockroach. And of course, you may modulate this interaction, because if you put 2 drops, or if you change the concentration, you smell like a lot of cockroaches, and so you're very attractive suddenly. But that was not the experiment. The experiment is to calibrate that the one robot smells like one cockroach. So the smell was not too intense, because otherwise it's easy. Because usually the criticism we get, oh, that experiment is completely bullshit and stupid, because if you want to get cockroaches below a shelter, it's very easy. You put a drop of pheromone there, end of the game. Problem solved. Everybody is there. But that's not a dynamical way of doing it, because in fact it's the human that is deciding to gather the cockroaches. It's not anybody else. And if you want to move them to the other one, you have to move the drops and so on. So this is a kind of artificial cockroach that is proving that the model is right, because in fact it's moving around, it's behaving like the model, and it's modulating the behavior, because if we change the solution of the group, if we change what the robot is doing, the solution of the group is changing.
Was it the pheromone, or was it another identifying chemical?
It's a blend of chemical. Then there is debate in biology. Is it a pheromone or not?
Okay, unclear.
Yeah, it's pheromone, because they have precise definition of what a pheromone is, but
Sure.
Our colleague biologists call that a pheromone, an ID pheromone.
But to what extent could you really modulate the behavior with different concentrations of this mixture? To what extent could you modulate the behavior?
You can track them intensely. I mean, if it smell a lot. You mean saturation?
Can it break this aggregation model? That, for instance, they all run so at what threshold level would they immediately all run for the same shelter, where you would have the robot that is sort of distributing a lot of this?
Yeah, that's the equivalent of dropping a big drop of pheromone on that place.
Yeah.
So that we avoided that. That breaks the model.
Yeah, sure. So the question, do you know the threshold level where that would happen? It might be interesting to find the boundary. That would help you to define boundary conditions.
Yeah. So we come back to the threshold function.
Okay.
So the threshold function, the threshold is it's the size of the cluster you need to stay there,
Yeah.
and it's about 3, 4, 5 cockroaches, which means that if you put a drop that is the equivalent of 5 or more cockroaches, you're above the threshold. But we didn't test if you can saturate their olfactory organ.
Yeah.
I mean, putting so much perfume that you don't smell anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
But usually attracting insect with pheromones works.
They won't switch. This is the point, that they won't switch, right?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's a dynamical system. I don't show it the figure. So the ID, I just passed this this slide. So the yellow bars are robot plus cockroaches, a minority of robot, and the brown bars are cockroaches only. And you see that by modulating the behavior of the robot, just modulating not the model, but just a parameter of the model. For instance, the preference for light, which keeping the same behavioral model, but changing slightly that parameter in the model, then the difference, the decision that is made by the group change. And it corresponds to the prediction of the model. So that was the proof that, okay, we can build robots that behave like cockroaches and they do interesting things. We can mix them with insects and they behave all together like they are a member of the same group.
Can you please explain the histogram, because it's a bit confusing to me.
Yeah.
So yellow is the robot, brown is the cockroach,
Yeah.
right? And we have a light shelter and a dark shelter.
Yeah. And so the cockroaches prefer the dark shelter, as you see. In 73% of the cases, they gather below the dark shelter.
Right.
And they do go to the lighter one, but only 27% of the cases. And that you can get with the model simulations, right? The model simulation says, okay, the cockroaches are going to prefer the dark one, but it's a stochastic system. Collective behavior is always based on stochastic behavior. And so most of the time you have that solution, but in 10% of the time you can get the other solution. Now you add the robot, and the model predicts that you're going to change the majority. So they're going to be, most of the time, the light shelter, right?
Why is that?
Because they do take care about what the others are doing. And if they believe the robot is a cockroach, they do take care of what that robot is doing. But they do take care of it in a non-linear way, which means a minority of individuals can have a big impact on the group as a whole. So you can modulate the whole group behavior by changing a minority of their individuals.
The robot is biased toward going to the light shelter.
Yeah, exactly. It's very easy. It's a change in the parameter. And so the robot, that's the experiment. So you get a change of majority. And of course, that's also interesting. This means that the robots were driven to the shelter that they do not prefer by the cockroaches. See? Because the robots are built to be social and to take care of what the cockroaches are doing. It was one of the assumptions we made. And so in that case, the robots are convinced, between quotes, by the cockroaches to go in the shelter. They do not prefer because the parameters have been tuned to do that. So it's a social system. The robots are responding to the cockroaches, and they are driven in the dark shelter, and the cockroaches are driven by the robots in the lighter shelter. And then there is a modulation of the size of the group that depends on the number of cockroaches and other kind of parameters of the system.
Yeah, sorry, what is the percentage? What are the percentages of robots and cockroaches?
So we were doing experiments there with a small number of animals. So it was 16 cockroaches or 12 cockroaches plus 4 robots.
But if you want to prove that the cockroaches influence the robot behavior, you need to compare with the condition where they are only robots.
Yeah, we did.
Okay, that's not fair, right?
No, it's not. I don't show all the data in all the experiments. Yeah, we did that. They do behave. And there are other papers by other people that have reproduced that behavior with other robots. You can implement the model and you get the same result. Simon Garnier has done that in Toulouse with Alice robots.
But now the funny thing is that
I don't know if I have the slide there.
you model it as a dynamical system, but then in the end you give us, let's say, a quantification in terms of static distributions.
Yeah.
So what you really would like to know, I think, is
Yeah.
how the system changes over time and whether this is captured by the model.
That's another question. Ooh, that's another question.
Yeah. Okay. But
You know, experiments are hard. We spent 4 years to do that. And it only cost 2 million euros.
Mhm.
So what you're asking, yet another
But
experiment.
you have the data. No, you have that data. You know how the positions change over time.
Yeah, I have
And
that
whether
data.
whether they converge
Yeah.
at a certain rate.
Yeah, it's in the
You wanna
paper.
you want to look at these convergence rates.
Yeah, and they are slightly different.
Okay.
comparing the experiments to the model. Because the model doesn't capture everything of the system.
Oh, sure.
It's still a model. There are differences.
Okay.
For instance, one of the main differences is the time, the fact that the probability may change in time. But if you want to go into the details, we can. But so we are looking at the dynamics of filling up the shelters. Of course, there are the slides, but because I want to speak about the chicken and the stuff,
Sure.
but I will not in the end because we are spending
Now you
all
will
the time.
talk about how you solve the chicken and egg problem.
Now I want to ask the question, if you have any more question about the cockroach stuff. Still yet. All my life I will have to answer cockroach question.
You asked for it.
So
Yeah.
based on the model, if you actually add sufficient pheromone for not just one, I mean, in your robot, the amount of pheromone or whatever is this chemical substance you use is equivalent to one cockroach.
Yeah.
So based on the model about, let's say, the mass, if
Yeah.
you would put more drops, that
Yeah.
it would be equivalent to more.
Yeah.
Would you say that then mostly the cockroaches, the result would actually change
Yes.
towards with being more favorable, the light shelter compared to the dark one?
Yes,
In
yes,
that
and
case?
you need less robots also, because the robots are going to count one robot is going to count like 3 or 4 cockroaches. It's a parameter in the model, by the way.
So indeed you would see that then the cockroaches would be so much, let's
Yeah.
say, biased
Yeah.
by
So
the
again,
mass.
the correct answer to that is we did not do the experiment with robots, right? But the model shows that indeed it's going to be the case.
Okay.
Now, we did a lot of tests of the pheromone without the robots also. And of course, the intensity of the smell, the higher the intensity, the higher the effect also.
Okay, thank you.
So now I want to address this question is how was the model program into the robot with our colleagues engineer at the EPFL? By tinkering and arguing for 2 years. That's the answer. By arguing about what the differential equation means in terms of individual, exactly the question you were addressing. They say, well, that's a differential equation, but I have to program my robot. It's an individual, and I start from a blank page, right? And so we are arguing what's the meaning of differential equation. And then we realize that that's interdisciplinary work. Then we realize that everything what is obvious for us that we've been trained in physics, we know all the hypotheses behind that equations, that was not at all obvious for engineers in robotics. They were...
Anything different than between thermodynamics and statistical physics, no?
No, it's a bit, it's the same kind of difference, but it's a bit more tricky when you're talking about animals and robots and stuff like that, because you cannot travel easily from one level to the other. I will discuss that now.
That's why it's interesting.
Sorry?
That's why it's interesting.
Yeah, of course, also, but it's tiring also. So that's basically, I know you are programming robots, so that's basically the scheme of the robot. So it's a blank page. You have to take into account the lower level behavior like obstacle avoidance, wall avoidance, and so on. You have to deal with the interrupts. You have to deal to selection of the behavior that the robot is performing, and so on. And on top of that, it has to mimic the differential equation. So after 2 years of arguing and working by tinkering, we were lucky enough to have the model implemented in the robot, embodied in the robot. And it was done really by tinkering and arguing. And at the end of the day, we added a floating point microcontroller to be able to compute the threshold function, because we were not solving that issue. And so we changed the design of the robot to have floating point capabilities computation just to do the computation of the threshold function. So it it's really a problem because you see there is no automatic way, no design process involved. It's just arguing. So we want to solve also, we want to improve that problem. So what we are working now is we want to automate the system. Why we want to automate the system? We want to automate the data analysis. That seems obvious, right? But it's not so easy to do. We want to automate model generation. And we want to automate robot design and controller of production of the controller for the robots. Why you want to automate that? Because the experiments with the cockroaches I just showed you, it's 4 years work. 4 years work with a few PhDs in biology or in modeling in biology, a few PhDs in engineering, 4 years to get a cockroach model. You imagine the cost of that? I said it's 2 million. So if each time you have to do that, you have to spend a few years and have a bunch of scientists working all the time to solve that problem, the cost is huge. And that's probably why nobody else is doing that in the world except a few labs. But if we succeed in automating one part of the work, we are improving the speed of convergence towards the models we want to implement. And the way, and from those models, we want to generate automatically. That's what we are working on for the moment. Generating automatically the controls of the robot. So you do experiments, and you want the individual and the collective behavior to be analyzed. And so you want. I would like to automate the modeling process, okay. And from those models, you can also optimize the number of robots and the parameters of the robots in the system. From the data, I also want to generate automatically some models for the agent behavior. The models can be equations or not. That's open debate. So there is this work by Hot Lipson is at Cornell, right? I think that automated the modeling of a pendulum by evolutionary algorithm. So it generated the equation that is the solution of the pendulum. So there is hope that maybe we can generate models by evolutionary methods. So that's the idea behind my current research hobby, because that's not my main job, by the way. So for the cockroaches, what we did is, in fact, we were doing the experiments. We didn't automate anything there. We generated the equations. With the equations, we generate some results. Those results are implemented into robots, controllers. The robots are then added to the system, and we can loop to improve it. So you see, nothing is automated, but the model was extremely helpful into predicting what the experiments were going to give. And you are very happy when you have a model that gives you not only the controllers for the robot, but also predicting what the experiments are going to give. And of course, you're very happy when it works. And that's one case where it works. It's probably the only one I know where it worked. But there is another issue, is that you want to optimize this multi-level modeling. Exactly the question we're discussing. You need a behavior at the individual level, agent-based model, and also if you have a nice, neat differential equation that is predicting a lot of things, you want to keep it also, and you want to move from one to the other, right? And it's getting late, right? Yes, for just the rest of... So the idea is the following. It's exactly the idea of statistical physics, but applied to a messy, dirty, awful, shitty problem in terms of maths. You have a microscopic level description. For instance, you describe the movement with a random walk, and you have this set of differential equations. They are correct, but they have been generalized, so nobody understands anymore what they mean. But it doesn't matter. So you have, and you have, of course, those parameters that, answering your question, those parameters tell you if how intense the attraction between the robots and the cockroaches can be. And so what I would like to do is to travel automatically between this level of description. Why you want this finite state machine or Markov chains model is because from there you can fairly easily generate a robot controller. From a differential equation, you cannot easily generate a different robot controller. You need a lot of steps, like I just showed in the other side, because you need to take into account all the details of the lower level behavior of the robot. So I want to jump. So if we were in the situation where we had this nice model done by the physicist, between quotes, and then we wanted to jump to there. And we did that by tinkering. And so now the question is, no, I don't want to do that by tinkering, but by generating the set of parameters that we can travel between the models. Because it's a necessity from a scientific point of view, but it's also, so intellectually it's interesting, but it's also a necessity from a technological point of view if you want to generate in less than 2 years the controller for a robot. So you have the story is you have parameters there, you have parameters there, and the question is, I want to match those parameters with those ones to have the same solution, right? And so the answer is you can do that. So the answer is you take a state-of-the-art evolutionary algorithm, one off the shelf. Computer scientists have been working also. They were not sleeping during that time. And so you just define a fitness function, and the fitness function is being designed as the distance between two bifurcation diagrams. So I don't want a set of parameters that reproduce a specific, one set of parameters that reproduce a specific behavior. I want a whole range of behavior to be generated by the optimization process. And so we were optimizing for bifurcation diagrams and not for single solution, right? And the short answer is it works. It works if you simulate the different level macro, micro, hybrid. I don't get into the detail of hybrid, what it means. Hybrid was what we did by tinkering and adding the threshold function. So you see that it matched. So state-of-the-art evolutionary algorithm can generate automatically the set of parameters. And once you have your Markov chain, then automatically you can generate the controller of the robot in that simple case, right? There is another thing that you want to optimize is the number of cockroaches that the number of robots, that you want to add. Because if you need to add a large number of robots to control the group, it's not interesting because you want to put as little robots as possible to modulate what the whole group is doing. So not only you want to optimize the parameters to get the behavior, but you want to optimize the number of robots that you want to develop, to inject in the system.
What you optimize in your Markov chain is just the transition probabilities between states.
Yeah.
But
this one.
The boxes,
In-
you find them by hand, right?
In this case, yes, they were given because the solution was known, because we have been working previously. So, but the next step is we don't define those boxes. That's the next step. So let's jump to next steps faster. So you want to optimize the number of robots and the number of robots change, blah, blah, blah. So then you want to do the same thing with chicks. Let me jump. So you have a robot, that's a hen. That's the mother of the chicken. It's a multimodal robot. And you want the chick to believe that this is the mother. But it doesn't matter. I will not discuss about that. That's the chicken and the robot. You see, mommy, mommy. So they were fooled by filial imprinting for those who know animal behavior. That's the luring method. It works. So I wanted to generate automatically the ethograms. So what basically you have, if you, what I'm going to show. So basically you're recording. The only thing you're doing is you're recording what's happening in the system, right, by a digital camera. And the only thing you want to have is the position of everybody in time. And from there, you want to reconstruct everything you want about behavior. And so the idea was to automatically generate all this data to produce some kind of ethograms of what the chicken are doing. And then, of course, you can classify the chicken when you have one strip correspond to one chicken. And just by looking at the picture, you don't need an algorithm. Just by looking at those things, you can sort them out, and you see that you have three kind of chicken. Those ones, and those ones. So, and it is automated, which means it takes a fraction of a second on a normal workstation, not on your smartphone, but on a normal workstation. So you do the experiment, you go to the printer, and the printer has done the job. So you're compressing the time to analyze the data. You can sort out the chicken, and the other thing is to segment the trajectory of the chicken, because the only thing you have is a trajectory, and you want from that trajectory have a behavior model. So you build automatically an ethogram. So this is not done by hand but by an algorithm, and then you have a segmentation in terms of behavior of the trajectory. So the trajectory there in color corresponds to behavior. So the behaviors are join, follow, in front, loop, bumped, and stop and go, right? This is automatic, and for those who are in computer science here, we've tried a state-of-the-art algorithm, and they give very good results. So now you should ask the question, yeah, but who defined that? It's me. It's the experimentalists who define the box. But you don't want to. You want to automate also the generation of that box. Yes, that's what we are working on. We don't want to put that. But the thing is, once you have that, okay, you can have a Markov chain description and the table transition, the probability of transition between the states of the behavior of the chicken, and you have a diagram in terms of Markov chain of what it's doing. We haven't done it, but from there to jump to a robot control, it's much easier. And it's an automated process, right? But still, you have, so what we have done here with the chicken is we have improved the line. So we have automated the data analysis to generate a Markov chain model, which is quite trivial. Well, I mean, it's not trivial to generate it, but it's a simplest model you can do about an animal. And then we didn't do it, but you can inject that as a robot control and make the loop. But then I move labs, and in the lab where I am, they don't like chicken.
But in this Markov chain, there is no perception. It's just about from one state to the other, but the transition depends on what the robot perceives.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's implicit in the data you give to the system. So you need to perform that Markov chains, you need a robot that perceives its environment.
Yeah, I mean, the transition from, I don't know, loops to stop,
Yeah.
it depends on the perception of the robot when it loops.
Yeah.
And so you have inputs to each of these boxes, and some perception, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So let's jump to fish now. So we want to do the same trick with fish. And so it's very difficult to work with fish because they are small. It looks like that. So what I would like to do again is to have robots. These are the fish. It's zebra fish. It's an animal model. And you want to lure them. The problem is those fish are 3 to 4 centimeters, 3.5 centimeters, which means you cannot build a robot of that size again. Why? Because it's the battery. You don't get the autonomy. And besides, it's underwater robotics. And again, it has a lot of problems. So to solve this issue, we decided with our colleagues at EPFL, again, it's their job, we decided to split the problem. We have the robot outside of the tank, below the tank, and we have a kind of luring robot in the water, just some piece of robot on a stick. And so it looks like that. You have the robot driving below the tank and just a little luring stuff actuated or not in the tank. So that's the version. This version is the actuated one. So it can beat the tail because the fish are sensitive to beating the tails. So after looping a lot about how to produce an artificial fish, we 3D scanned zebrafish, we 3D printed the zebrafish lures. The engineers decided how to actuate the tail and stuff like that. But anyway, I won't discuss that too much. The point is that you need a model for the fish, the robot fish, to behave. So you need to understand how a fish is behaving. And it's again the same trick. You can take a group of fish or a single fish, you put it in a tank, you record everything, and the same trick as I've been discussing before. From the trajectory, you want to analyze it in an automated way, and you want to produce a model of the system, right? So that we develop a lot of, we spend our time developing a lot of software to do that. That's why it's very heavy. So the PhD student working on that decided that it should be called CATS, because cats won't catch fish. Well, anyway. And it's also the control and tracking software. So you need to track the video. You need to publish the video for video streaming to check what's going on in the experiments, because at the end of the day there are no human beings in the experimental room. So you set up the experiments, you get out, and the system is autonomous. So you expect to remove the bias induced by the human in the loop during animal behavior experiments, which may be important. You know that animals can perceive what the experiments want. If you take vertebrates, rats or mice or horses, the clever hands, so they guess what you want and they do it. So that's in animal behavior. So when you're working with animals, with rats, you do experiments. You say, okay, he wants me to go to the right and then enter in the box. I will do that. It's okay, I will do it. Because you're sending to the animal signals that you're not conscious about those signals, and they perceive it. The classical psychological experiments is, Clever Hands stuff. In Clever Hands was a horse that was capable of counting. So you ask him 5 plus 6, and the horse was tapping the floor with his leg until it reaches the number, which is 11, right? So 11 times. Then people in the audience could ask also calculation, and the horse was. So it was clever. And at the end of the day, to make the short, so everybody was wondering if there is a trick, if it's cheating or not. So they removed the owner, they put some other people in that place, and so on, a lot of experiments. And at the end of the day, what Clever Hands, the horse, was doing is not counting, it's perceiving what the experimenter was doing. So when you were looking at the horse tapping, when you was going to reach the correct number, you send a signal. And consciously you send to the horse a signal, stop, and the horse stop. So that's why you want to remove the human out of the loop. So I will jump all the details, nobody cares. So again, so you have the data of the trajectories. You generate these chronograms of ethograms of the behavior, right? And this is generated automatically, and the boxes that there are generated automatically also. So the only thing you inject in the system, it's the data of the trajectories, and then the algorithm is trying to guess what are the relevant boxes or behavior, and to classify the trajectory according to that. It doesn't work yet. It's work in progress. So from there you generate a Markov chain where the Markov chain, the boxes, the states are not decided by the experimentalist, it's decided by the algorithm. So it's improving the fact, like you were asking, yeah, but the boxes, who decided that? Us. But in this case, it's been generated by the data. I don't know if it works, because the problem you have when you do that with an algorithm is that you're generating a lot of states. That's one example, but do I have another one? Yes, you can generate states and more states. So the technological question is, what are the states that are relevant? So what we are working on is you cannot remove completely the human out of the loop of analyzing the data, because those states have to make sense. So what we are doing now is we generate a table of states that can be large, though that's too much. Then it has to be sparse, like we have to reduce the dimensionality of, and that's a complicated stuff in data analysis. But at the end of the day, we are checking if you cannot read it, but there is a label there, and that's the experimentalist that gives the label. It is, okay, behavior 32. Yes, behavior 32 corresponds to fish moving to the wall. Okay, that's relevant. I give it a label, fish to the wall, it's relevant. So that's what we are working on. It doesn't work yet, but basically we are reaching the point where we can generate automatically some ethograms. I'm not saying that they are fully correct for the moment. And from the ethograms, we are going to be capable of generating a model, and we hope that the model can be implemented to interact with the fish, because the basic hypothesis in this work is that we are using more and more, I don't know if you have noticed, we are using more and more, between quotes, complicated animals. It's not that the cockroaches are simple, it's the fact that they're completely different. And the fish is a vertebrate, and so they're highly multimodal. They use olfaction, they use vision, those fish. They use the lateral line to feel water flows and stuff like that. So the question is, what does a robot need to be part of a group of fish? And it's a difficult question. There are a few groups doing that. Two, I think, other groups are trying to do that. And it's very difficult to fool a fish. Very difficult. The visual aspect of the lure is important, because they can see if you look or not like a fish. But the visual aspect is not, my hypothesis is that the visual aspect is not enough. What we also need is that the lure behave like a fish. And it's pretty obvious. But if you look like a human, and you say, okay, that's a human, but then you behave completely strangely, then people will start to think, whoa, wait a second, is that really a human? So for the fish, it's the same thing. If you look like a fish, and what does it mean looking like a fish? It's not a solved problem. We are still wondering what it means to look like a fish. And it has to behave. And we are, for the moment, we are implementing a model, a biomimetic model, like the cockroach one, but for fish, to make the robot behave like a fish, to see if it has a higher impact. The answer is it has a higher impact. But what we haven't solved is, what does it mean to look like a fish? The problem is, when we discuss about that with a biologist, at the end of the discussion you get, well, it's very easy. To look like a fish, you need to be a fish. But when you are building robots, you don't want to build artificial fish. If you see what I mean by artificial fish. A highly equivalent robotic equivalent of a fish, which is extremely difficult to do. You want something good enough to look like a fish, right? And so this tricky answer with this annoying zebrafish, because the zebrafish are supposed to be social, but they are not so social. They're at the edge of chaos, those ones, in terms of social behavior. Yes, you wanted to ask a question?
But did you not start with the stickleback?
No, because the stickleback are not social.
Right, but they're easier to fool at the same time.
Sorry?
They're easier to fool
Yes.
at the same time.
Yeah, but again, so there are many ways you want to interact with animals. What I'm trying to do is to build robots that are members of the group in terms of behavior. So they are fish-like, they are cockroach-like, they are chicken-like. It's not the sheepdog problem. You see what I mean? When you want to take care of the sheep, usually it's either a human that is taking care of the sheep, the shepherd, right? Or a dog. So I don't want to build a robot dog that takes care of the sheep. I want to build a sheep that influence the group of the sheep. Why I want to do that? Because it's a different question, and I think that question is interesting. So I'm again in the cockroach question, in the chicken question, in the fish question. I'm not interested in controlling the animals, controlling the sense of solving an engineering solution. Like I want to gather all the cockroaches in one place to kill them, because people want to kill cockroaches all the time, or shepherd sheep. No, I don't want to do that. I want to answer the scientific question: how to build a robot that is good enough as a social companion to participate in the social behavior of that animal, because then I think I will have learned things about what it means to be an animal and how to build a machine that is good enough to behave like a good animal companion. So the stickleback, the only behavior that is well identified by Timbergen, the story is that he noticed that because he had a stickleback aquarium in his lab. I don't remember if it's Oxford or Cambridge, it doesn't matter, it's there in England. And then he saw that the fish started to be very aggressive because they are territorial. The male is territorial, is fighting to keep his territory from other males, right? That's why it's not interesting for me. It's interesting in itself, but not for me. And so he noticed that when the male was coming, the fish started to fight. But the royal male in the UK, I don't know if you remember or if you've seen that, it's a red van. And that's how Timberger got the idea, wow, if I show something red to the fish, it's going to react. But that's a different question. You want to trigger a response that is very simple. I want a social behavior, and I don't want a sheepdog, a shepherd dog, right? I want some kind of artificial animal that is a companion, a social companion.
But one could ask, what is the added value of having this kind of hybrid robot and animal society? Because if you just have a model with only robots and it behaves like the society, what do you understand more if you mix societies as you do?
Yeah.
What is added to scientific value?
That's a good question that referees are always asking when they reject the papers. So
I see that.
let me just show you some conclusions. Well, that's the conclusion by Alan Turing, by the way. We can only see a short distance ahead, but we can see plenty that needs to be done. So let me show you some kind of conclusion. Where is some kind of conclusion? Yeah. So what is the added value? So as again, I think it's an interesting way to do biological experiments, right? Behavioral experiments. Why I think that? It's again, if there are no physicists, are there any physicists in the room here? Ooh. So if I don't know if you know Richard Feynman. Richard Feynman, the famous physicist, one of the most brilliant physicists of the 20th century, and a funny guy also, Nobel Prize for quantum electrodynamics, but it doesn't matter. On his blackboard at Caltech was a sentence: "What I do not understand, I cannot construct." Okay, right? That's the idea. Yeah, the other way around. I've been drinking too much. Yeah. And so what it meant by that, then you can argue it's not true, because you can build things that works and you don't understand how they work. A cathedral have been constructed like that in the Middle Age. Nobody understood the forces, really clearly the forces. By tinkering, they realized that you have to take into account the forces if you want the building to stay and not to crumble. But that's the idea. So when you understand something, you can construct an artificial thing out of it. It's the idea of synthetic biology. Exactly. It's synthetic animal. The idea of synthetic biology is if I understand how genetics and metabolism work, I can build artificial cells. And the proof that you understand is that you have built an artificial cell, right? And nobody has done that until now. There is no such thing as an artificial cell. It's always shuffling elements of existing cells. So you see, we don't understand what it means to be a cell. now. And synthetic biologists are trying to do that with different tricks. So that's the added value. If I understand what an animal is, then I can generate synthetic animals. Then why do you want to generate synthetic animals? I want to do that for my intellectual pleasure, because then I think I've understood something. Then I find it neat. You know, physicists find they always need to build stuff, devices, lasers, rockets, whatever. You see? So it's neat. You produce technology at the same time. So now you may think, because in terms of robotics, it's interesting to generate animal robots and to test them with their equivalent, the animal equivalent, because it's a big test in robotics. Usually in robotics, if you look at animal-like robots, what the roboticists are doing, they build a robot to test some knowledge about low-level behavior, how to walk with 2 legs, 4 legs, 6 legs, 8 legs, how to be an octopus, stuff like that. What does it mean to have a body that is flexible and rigid at the same time, like in soft robotics with the octopus robot and stuff like that. So because they are biomimicking animals to build interesting robots. It's the same here, but at the social level. And the final test is not, does the robot walk with 6 legs, like an insect? No, it's, is it good enough as a synthetic animal to be accepted by the real animals?
But also, one added value I see is also you could have a good model of individuals that reproduce social behavior
Yeah.
in simulation, for
Yeah.
example. But still, and even assuming that you are able to completely fool the animal,
Yeah.
it could not work if you put it in a real animal society because you haven't completely understood.
Yeah. Yeah,
Have
that-
you example of this?
That's the classic embodiment question. Does an abstract model really capture the essence of the behavior? Are there some hidden variables that you miss? And when you do the embodiment,
Several solutions
yeah.
that give the same output, but you still don't know which one.
Yeah, exactly. Also, and then when you do the embodiment, it's a physical check that you have a real behavior, not a simulation. And by the way, Jean-Louis Donnebourg, the guy who is specialized about ant behavior, when he started to build robots, it was to prove to the biologists that he was right. Because when he showed in the 80s, early 90s, his ant equation to biologists, they all laughed. Say, ah, ha, ha, no, an ant is a very complicated animal. True. It has complicated behavior, complicated structure. True. So that simple model cannot be true because you're missing something. And it's not because your simulation is giving the same behavior as the ants that it's a correct answer. So he decided to go to build little automata robots that are just performing like the ants, like the model of the ants, not like the ants, like the model of the ants. Nothing more. It's like, who was talking about that synthetic psychology? It's Tony? Yeah, exactly that. It's the idea that...
Right?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea was that one. Then, so you know what is inside the box. There is nothing more that you've put in. There is no hidden variable. Because with a real animal, there are so many hidden stuff that you may miss something. And then he showed that indeed, those little robots were behaving like the ants. So the model was good enough, and only that model, to reproduce this specific behavior. It was not interested in the robot for being a roboticist. He wanted it as an experimental demonstration that the model is correct. And it's true that the loop of embodiment is interesting to test the model. We know that. Although I'm fairly confident about my models.
And it's possible only with social behavior, actually, because if
Yeah.
it's an individual, you cannot
Yeah.
confront it to...
Yeah. So there was another question. There was another question there.
All right, more
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah,
So,
there.
To come back to your experiment with cockroaches,
I know.
but it's the same with the chicks or the fish.
Yeah.
You assume that there is no hierarchical social behavior.
Yeah. No, I don't assume. I know.
Okay. And
there are some hierarchical behavior in the chicks.
okay. And how would you model this kind of hierarchical behavior?
So that's again an arbitrary decision. I choose to to study with animals where there are no evident hierarchy, because I think it's more interesting. And because the animals that do have a strong hierarchy are difficult to bring to the lab. For instance, in the chicken, it was exactly to answer, we designed those experiments that have never been finished because I changed lab and so on, but doesn't matter. That's why I stopped. I mean, I didn't stop because it was not interesting, because I couldn't do it anymore. So there is a hierarchy. The simple hierarchy is the mother and the chicks, right? The mother is the boss, because the chicks are going to follow the mother. That's the first hierarchy. But then within the group of chicks, there are some chicks that are more important than others. So we are looking that for the fish also. Is there a hierarchy in zebrafish? The answer is no. No obvious hierarchy. We've been spending a lot of time analyzing the data. We don't find one. Are there individuals more important than others? Yes and no. So all those questions are interesting in terms of animal behavior, because what is fascinating is when we don't have a hierarchy and you still have group decision.
But also you could say that, could you imagine to make emerge this hierarchical behavior only with the same equation? Like as you say, for the chicks, some of them are more important than others. Could you put all the same chicks robot and...
Yeah, so the short answer is I don't find a hierarchy in my system, but I find variability between the individuals. So which means that you don't need to have clones in terms of robots, you see. They don't need to have all the same parameters. For instance, there is discussion in zebrafish that there are some that are bold and some that are shy. Don't know if you're aware of behavior in biology. So the bold ones are the explorer ones. They want always moving around. They want to explore the environment. The shy ones are the ones that say, if I start to move, I'm going to get killed. So I stay calm. And then if you have a group and you have bold ones and shy ones, how do they stay together? That's an interesting question also. So when I analyze the data, I see that I have a variety of inter-individual differences, and I can take care of that in my models because they are not completely different. I see that in the change in parameter, changing a parameter, right? You have the slow one, speed 2.5, and then you have the fast one, speed 5.2. But they're the same model. You just tune the speed parameter, for example.
Animals, and you want to analyze their behavior as if it was a normal being amongst them. But in the experiment of chicken, I think you said chickens followed the robot saying that like mama, mama. So there was a sort of a leader-follower relationship.
Yeah.
But you said that you wanted everyone to be kind of equal, no?
Yeah, yes and no. That's the long answer. So the chicken robot experiment was to test a case where there is some kind of hierarchy that is well known. For instance, mother chicks, hen chicks relationship, and to prove that this idea of hierarchy is not that obvious. And there is an interplay, so each chicken are more individual than what the hierarchy model would say. Because, so the trick is, you know that when a bird hatches, many species of bird, when they hatch out of the egg, there is this phenomenon called filial imprinting. So the thing that is moving around making noise is learned as to be the mother. So it's a learning, there is a learning window in the brain of the chicken, and then it's learning that this thing that is moving around is the mother. And so Lorenz has shown what is known since ages in the antiquity. They all breeders of birds knew that, but Lorenz formalized it. In fact, it can be anything. It can even be yourself. If you have a goose or stuff like that, and you make them hatch, and you behave like the mother around them, they're going to be attracted by you. That's the famous picture of Lorenz walking around, followed by geese and stuff like that. So we used that trick. But the filial imprinting, so there was a window. So the filial imprinting, which is a very classical stuff, we revisited with high throughput ethology, like they say, the buzzword, like atomics. Woo-hoo. And so we notice that there is a huge variety of behavior. Usually when you read the classical paper, I have tested 3 birds, 5 birds, it works, great, yeah. Then I've tested 300 ones. I've calibrated the data with 30 minutes of all the data and stuff like that. And among all those 300 ones, you don't get imprinting all the time. They are the failure one that nobody talks about. They don't care. And you have a variety of intensity of the imprinting on each individual. And you have the last category one that we discover. That's why I will never be able to publish that, because the referee, I don't believe you, and anyway, you're a physicist. There are even chickens that are afraid of the robot at the end of the day. So you've done the same experimental procedure with 200 chicken. You have a majority that are imprinted, a minority that is not imprinted, and a tiny minority that is running away as fast as they can from the robot. And so I was wondering, the guys who did the classical imprinting experiment, did they observe that? Because usually it's at that time, in the classical experiments, usually you pick up just the data that works. That's at that time. I think it's still the time they still do that in biology. The neuroscience is like that. When I was working with the neurons, I was discussing with a colleague. He said he was trying to reproduce a paper. It has a nice spike. Wow, that's a nice spike. When you go to the lab, you can never reproduce a spike. It happens once in a while. So they just cut, yeah, look, result. So probably, so you see that I did those experiments to try to prove, it's not finished, I will never finish them, to try to prove that hierarchy is not that important, and the variability between the individuals is important.
Why hatchlings of chicken only? Why not fish? And I think cockroaches were very.
Sorry?
The cockroaches that you used in your experiment were not.
Not what?
Were not newborns. I mean, they did not came out of their eggs. They were grown-ups.
The cockroaches, you mean?
Yeah, the cockroaches that
Yeah,
you
they
used.
came out of their eggs.
They were okay, but they.
What do you mean they were not new one? I don't understand.
Understanding of use different paradigms for the cockroaches,
Are
for
you
the chicken.
mixing up the
Yeah.
sort of imprinting paradigm?
No,
or
no.
just-
I'm asking that
Yeah.
it's easy to imprint on the newborns, the ones that come fresh into the world.
Yeah.
For chicken, for birds. it's
Yeah,
pretty well.
so exactly, the biology of the cockroach is completely different. The imprinting effect is only for vertebrates.
But in the fish,
In the finch, there is some imprinting effects, yes. But I'm not using the imprinting effect to lure with the robots.
Well, you cannot hold your breath long enough, right? That was the problem there. Marty. Question for Marty.
I was wondering if, I don't know if the kind of behaviors that you explored would be called more cooperative, but I was wondering if you have been interested also in looking at competitive versus cooperative collective behavior, maybe also in the presence of food or competition, or how the whole collective group behaves in this presence of food or something.
No, that was a short answer. No, it's a choice. It's interesting, but it's a choice. Why not food? Because it adds a lot of complexity in terms of experiment. If you add food in water, then you have to change the water all the time. And why not? Because I'm interested, again, I have a bias, as a physicist, I have a bias toward self-organization, emergence, and stuff like that. And so I'm more interested in understanding, and there is a whole field of physics, by the way, that is called active matter, which is inspired by that, so by biology. Active matter, you know, in physics, matter is not active because they don't have a source of energy, right? If you have an electron, it's not active in the sense that it doesn't have a source of energy in itself. It's moving because you have an electromagnetic field outside that is moving the stuff, with providing the force, the energy potential, and then the force to move the stuff around. So when you look at animals, they have an inside, or living system in general, they have an internal source of energy, and so they move. And so now in the field there are people, even at the level of matter, not robots, at the level of matter, there are people who are thinking how to make groups of particles, of polymers or whatever, that have the properties of living system. So I'm biased towards that kind of questions. So I'm not so much interested in competition, food or reproduction of stuff like that.
The cockroach example could be a bit competitive in the sense that if the shelters were smaller, cockroaches would need to compete to get one.
It's not really competition. They just go away. If they cannot enter, they just go away.
Okay, thank you.
So I wanted to ask, related to this, the previous question, in the case of humans, it's like a completely different scenario, right? But you can also have these measures to track behavior with in humans. Maybe not collectively, but at the level of the individual. So do you think your methods or the model you presented can be also used to extract markers of behaviors that are relevant, for instance, for...
Yeah, for the behaviors of humans, there is a field of collective human behavior which is a crowd movement. And there is a lot of interplay between people doing mathematical models of that. It's a classic example of mathematical modeling for physicists and mathematicians, crowd movement. And there are some experiments where they track how a crowd is moving, and they record the data, and from the data they try to do models, right? So it exists for crowd movement in humans, it exists. So now in terms of data analysis, the method I'm using, I'm not a computer scientist, and I don't want to develop new algorithm to process data. I'm taking off-the-shelf algorithm, and I hit my PhD student each time he wants to invent a new algorithm. I just start to strangle him. No, you will not invent, because there are many. It's another job. It's another question. It's of course very interesting to have a new evolutionary algorithm or deep learning algorithm to analyze data, blah, 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 or new type of deep learning net and stuff like that. But it's another question. So I'm using state-of-the-art machine learning techniques. And that can be used for any kind of data. It's not data specific. So if you have human behavior and you want to use machine learning to study it, you can do it. It will just take a few years to know how to do it. Because in fact, machine learning is not so obvious as method. It's quite a heavy, those methods are quite heavy to use to analyze data. That's why everybody is impressed by the deep learning nets, because they are very good and they perform very well to analyze complicated data.
But there's also black magic involved, right?
Yeah, there is not black magic. At the end of the day, you don't know you don't have a model of the data.
Tuning of
Yeah.
your parameters.
Yeah.
But without having to analyze just complex data, there is also all this field of agent-based modeling of language evolution.
Yeah.
Which was
Yeah.
done by
Looks still, yeah.
And then applied also to phonology, so you have like
Yeah.
very good statistical
Yeah.
data of how phonological systems are described in
Yeah.
different languages, and then a bunch of models that try to reproduce the statistics from local agents.
Yeah, it's another, yeah.
No, wait.
Paul, yes, but we have a coffee break and we have another talk.
Yeah, that's fine.
That is, well,
No, they're all on diet.
please be short.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, so just a question. So you want to create, let's say, robots that can be accepted socially, let's say, by a group of
Yeah.
animals. However, the robots, the animals that you have studied, I mean, they have social behavior, more like collective behavior, but then you have other kinds of animals that have much more, let's say, social behaviors, from playing to grooming, which are, I would say, rather more complicated than
Yeah.
the social decisions that you have to make with cockroaches or
Yeah.
following the chicks that follow the robot, right? So then, what extra parameters would you have to include? If it's the same model, it could be probably a much more different one to include such behaviors.
Yes.
So it's again a choice. The choice is driven by my own interest and what I can do in my university, in my lab. If you want to do experiments with dogs, there are other people that have been trying to do robot-dog interaction. I don't have dogs, and I cannot breed dogs in the lab. If you can do also some kind of interesting behavior with mice and rats, but I don't have the facilities to do that. And if you go to the facilities that exist, they don't want you inside and come mess around with those animals. That's one. So pragmatically, I cannot breed any kind of animals in a physics department. You imagine the cosmologists, they open the door, they see cockroaches, they say, what the fuck are you doing? You're supposed to be to do, general relativity. No, I will not do that. So that's pragmatically, no. But then, if you go for complicated animal, complicated means they have cognitive capabilities that are wider. For instance, rat, it's much more complicated. It's yet more complicated. And at the same time, it could be simple if the rat wants to play with the robot. There is only one Japanese guy, I don't remember his name, who is trying to do robot-rat interaction. But it's a completely different set of equation, of question.
Anna?
Just one last
Yes.
question.
But with the coffee break, huh?
Yeah. Very fast. You promised in the beginning of your talk that you would reveal why humans are so fascinated by robots while fish or chicks are not. So, but you didn't come back to that.
No.
So can you just briefly, can you just briefly, how are you going to extrapolate all this knowledge to say the humans are fooled by robots? While fish are not. Well, you said you showed us exactly the opposite.
I'm not extrapolating that fact. I'm saying that humans have very social and cognitive, very special social and cognitive capabilities, and they are projecting a lot of intention all the time. See, when you show anything to a human being, it's projecting intention. It's projecting a lot of things on that machine, even if it's a piece of wood that is moving. This is a classic of psychology experiment where you show two pieces of paper moving around, and then people start to project, yes, that one is chasing the other is hiding, and it's just a piece of paper moved by somebody. You're extrapolating. So now if you go to different kind of animals that have different cognitive capabilities, they are less projecting stuff because they have a simple life. They want a simpler, because we have a lot of free time. So the only thing they want to do, those animals, is to eat, reproduce, survive. And we are beyond eating, reproducing, and surviving, more or less, for humans, more or less. So we have some free time in between all that. And so that's why for animals it's not that much interesting to interact with artificial stuff, because at the same time I wanted to test also this idea that biologists sell all the time, is that like competition, you're only interacting with members of your group and stuff like that, of your own species, of your own group. And so the Darwinian view of highly competitive animals that are blind to the rest of the group, and they only interact with each other. And I'm not so sure about that hypothesis. And I think animals are more open to interaction with anything that is not a threat, of course. And so it's also trying to test that. But I think after me, nobody is going to do that, and because it's too... The fact, well, so I've been doing that since 2002, and the number of results is very low. So there is a real question: why should we do that, and are we going to keep doing that? Because it costs a fortune to do those experiments. It's more and more difficult to.
Work could be relevant to supply a dying bee population, for instance, that you know.
No, that I'm against that.
You don't have to measure a lot on a dead bee population, no?
Sorry?
They stop moving.
No, that I don't want. I don't want. I don't want.
I was more thinking about clinical work with humans, right? So, like, for instance, with the stroke patients or with other patients we work with, there are massive challenges to automatically classify their behavior for also diagnostic purposes. And I think this might be a real interesting application domain for that, because
You want to simulate a cancer?
No,
no. No, not that. But so, okay, we are now close to the coffee break. So, but then to close up, so the cockroaches aggregate under these little umbrellas that you have on the beach, right? But now, so given that you understand the cockroach well, can you explain to us from your model why in the case of workshops people always aggregate towards the back of the room and towards the sides of the seating area? So how do we explain this distribution of people in schools like BCBT, because it's always like this?
Yeah, and when I'm teaching, it's always like that.
Okay, so how do you explain that?
Bad breath.
Bad breath, yeah. Too much alcohol the night before. All right, so on that note, thank you very much, Jose, for your great presentation. So, Anna, when do we get back here? 20 minutes? So 12:30? It's 10 past 12 now, so 20 minutes. Okay, 12:25. So you better aggregate around this coffee machine really fast. No, Jose, I was serious. I was realizing you should talk to Belen about this and Daniel and Diogo. We do a lot of clinical.
Yeah.
Can I take this one for you?
Yeah, sure.
You don't mind? You have the breakfast now. Okay. Thank you very much.